From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew.
President Biden signs a bipartisan security assistance package into law, surging nearly $95 billion in foreign aid to allies.
When it matters most, they stepped up and did the right thing. And I mean this sincerely. History will remember this time. History will remember this moment.
We'll be joined by Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters for a closer look at how Congress came together on this deal and where their efforts could focus next, including potential legislation on stablecoin.
And later, the Supreme Court gearing up to hear arguments tomorrow on whether former President Trump is immune from federal prosecution. We'll have more with former Watergate prosecutor Nick Akerman. So, Joe, certainly no shortage of things to look forward to tomorrow in Trump legal world. Not only will there be those Supreme Court arguments, he will be back in court.
That's right. In
New York. And, of course, the legal challenges facing Donald Trump, just one thing factoring in to the narrative today as we finally have the aid package signed into law by President Biden.
As Donald Trump will be locked in a courtroom again, Joe Biden will be free to roam. And today he did speak from the White House, culminating a long debate. It says White House sending foreign aid shipments already being deployed. The package will send assistance to allies, including Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. The president said the U.S. would expedite the emergency funding after months of stalled negotiations.
In the next few hours, literally the few hours, we're going to begin sending in equipment to Ukraine. This package is literally an investment, not only in Ukraine's security, but in Europe's security, in our own security. We're sending Ukraine equipment from our own stockpiles. Then we'll replenish those stockpiles with new products made by American companies here in America.
For more, we're joined now by Bloomberg's Mike Dorning, who has been following this aid package from the beginning as the deputy lead of our congressional coverage here at Bloomberg. So, Mike, this was an incredibly long road that finally, it seems, reached its end today. And President Biden, in those remarks, was heralding the fact that ultimately bipartisanship did win out here and this got done. I guess the question is this now just a fleeting moment in time in which Republicans and Democrats could get together for the interest of national security, as President Biden describes it, or can this last for the remainder of this Congress?
It's just a fleeting moment. They're not going to get together for the rest of Congress. This is a one thing where Speaker Johnson decided, and Mitch McConnell always was, allied with the administration, with Democrats on foreign policy. This was awful hard to do because of the divisions within the Republican Party on this. More than half of the House Republicans voted against including the Ukraine aid. But this is an instance where Speaker Johnson decided the best thing for the country, best thing for his party was to go ahead and align with Democrats and get this done.
Well, as the president was announcing this today and signing the legislation that he got through, the speaker made his way to New York. He was at Columbia University. Speaker Johnson paid a visit to the campus along with a few Republican lawmakers. Good chunk of the New York delegation amid growing protests on campus. He spoke earlier with the lawmakers behind him. Here's what he said.
They should never have to confront such hate on an American college campus. It's such a revered institution. Anti-Semitism has been growing in America, and it's clear why. Powerful people have refused to condemn it, and some have even peddled it themselves.
He's calling for Columbia's president to resign, as the Republican lawmakers in the New York delegation are as well. What's the purpose here? Is this leading to a policy decision in Washington, or is it just Republican messaging from the campus?
It's mostly Republican messaging here, and this is just a great for the Republicans pivot from this division over the Ukraine bill. So here what we have is something that divides Democrats and unites Republicans. The clash between supporters of Israel, and many Democrats are supporters of Israel, with the more progressives who are concerned about the plight of Palestinians. That's playing out on college campuses and really being a Democrat on Democrat fight. But the Republicans are united mostly on one side in support of Israel. And here you can take that foreign policy clash and make it a form of identity politics that actually helps Republicans.
Mike, it's great to have you with us. Bloomberg's Mike Dorning at the table to get us started. We asked voters how they felt about the U.S. sending additional security assistance abroad. A new Bloomberg News Morning Consult swing state poll out today finds 51% of voters in key swing states support sending aid to Israel, while 57% support sending aid to Ukraine. The poll was conducted before President Biden signed the package into law. And for a deeper dive into the numbers, we're joined by Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson, who has been leading our poll coverage here. Wendy, great to see you. We have long been told, and it's based on history, that geopolitics doesn't factor into voters' decisions so much in a presidential election. And we certainly have a good number of domestic issues that are driving folks to the polls this year, from abortion to the economy, to the border. To what extent is this getting people's attention?
Well, the interesting thing that we found in the numbers on this poll is that figure you cited of 51% of support for sending aid to Israel has dropped 10 points since the beginning, since we last asked the question in November, right after the Israel-Hamas war started. So this is a signal that aid to Ukraine has stayed steady at about 57%. But Americans' enthusiasm for helping Israel, as long as it's conducting the war in the way it is conducting it, has dropped, and that should be a red blinking light to Democrats and Republicans who are sort of all in for Israel without conditions.
Okay, so maybe, Wendy, while we're seeing waning interest or passion in supporting Israel, we're seeing an uptick perhaps on another issue, and that is abortion. We spoke with Eli Yokley, the U.S. politics analyst over at Morning Consult, our partner on this poll, and this is what he said on that topic.
We saw in this wave of surveys an increase among the voters who say their number one issue is abortion. That seems like it might be a bit of an out for President Biden, especially in Arizona, by the way, one of the places where he's doing the worst. The economy is almost tied with immigration, but abortion doubled since we started doing this.
And yet in Arizona, just today, Wendy, it seems circumstances may be starting to change. Of course, he was referring to, in Arizona, the Supreme Court allowing a law from back in the Civil War era, before Arizona was even a state, that basically outlaws all abortions, to take hold. The Arizona State House today repealed it. Still needs to go through the Senate, but is expected to pass there as well, which would mean that abortions can take place up to 15 weeks. Is this a blessing for Donald Trump and Carrie Lake, for that matter, who's running for Senate?
Yes, and it's certainly a blessing for Republicans who wanted to win re-election. The Arizona Senate only needs 2 Republicans to pass this, and all the Democrats. So it's likely to go through. Probably Republicans from the suburbs of Maricopa County. There are a lot of cries of betrayal, but, you know, in politics for both parties, there's your convictions and there's keeping your job. And they really do want to keep their job. They want Carrie Lake to be elected to the Senate, and they want Donald Trump to win. There is a referendum on the ballot in November that would codify abortion rights to, I believe 15 weeks, which is a somewhat popular, moderate position on abortion. Our poll showed that alone was going to drive Democrats and independents to the polls. Support for abortion rights in Arizona jumped 10 points that ruling came down while we were in the field. So it jumped 10 points for that. This repeal of that law, I think, blunts that effort.
I have to ask you about the economy, because some of the numbers for Joe Biden are bleak. Specifically, when you look not just about current conditions, you hear about the way people feel about the way things are now. It's where we're going. Joe Biden's trying to deliver a message of optimism among undecideds. It's single digits who believe the economy is going to get better in the next year. This is a massive problem.
Absolutely. That was probably the biggest finding in this poll, because the horse race numbers are pretty static. People are generally still feel the economy is their number one issue. But it was the deep, deep pessimism about the trajectory of the economy that was really striking to us. There were 18 to 34-year-olds who said the economy's bad, not getting better. 45 to 64-year-olds felt the same way. Those are majorities of those people felt that way. And then when you ask them, who do you blame or who is responsible for, the economy's conditions, it wasn't the Fed, it wasn't Wall Street. Whether true or not, it was the President of the United States. And so when you feel bad about the economy, when you don't see it getting any better, when you can't buy a house or, pay for as many groceries as you normally like, it's possible you're going to vote the guy out who you feel is responsible for this. So Biden's messaging is not working. They're going to have to take another tack.
All right, Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson, thank you so much for joining us on another Bloomberg Morning Consult poll day. Now, coming up still, Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters, the ranking member of the House Financial Services Committee, will join us, and we're going to ask her about potential stablecoin legislation. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Democrats were there not only helping to pass the rule, which is the first step to getting the bill to the floor, but helping to pass the bill. I do give the Speaker credit in that he worked with Leader Jeffries to make sure that we could get those bills to the floor and get them passed.
That was Democratic Congresswoman Kathy Manning of North Carolina speaking with us yesterday about the bipartisan effort it took to get the foreign aid bill passed and to President Biden's desk. He, of course, gave it his signature earlier today. For more on how all of this came together and where we go next, we're joined by Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters of California. She's the ranking member on the House Financial Services Committee. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being here. There's much we'd like to discuss with you, including fair housing. But first, we have to begin with really marking this moment. Foreign aid is now law. It is already on its way to allies like Ukraine. It was very difficult to get here, and yet Mike Johnson decided it needed to get done. There is a real chance that when you get back from recess along with your colleagues, he might be faced with the idea that he's going to lose his job as a result. Given what he just was able to accomplish alongside Leader Jeffries, would you cast a vote to protect him if it becomes necessary?
Well, I don't think that we need to think about it really happening. As a matter of fact, Marjorie Taylor Greene has threatened him. He did not back down. And even now, Trump is supporting him and saying, oh, it was a very difficult thing. It's something that had to be done in so many words. And so I don't want us to think for some reason Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to win on this one. I'm going to wait and see. I don't believe it's going to happen. I don't think there's going to be a motion. I want to ask you more.
Understood, Congresswoman. So far, it is just a threat. That's not a privileged resolution, and we'll keep tabs on that. As we'd like to ask you about what's inside this package here. The president discussed security assistance for Israel today when he spoke to reporters, as well as the aid set aside specifically for humanitarian efforts in Gaza. Love for you to listen to what he said, and we'll have you respond.
All right.
My commitment to Israel, I want to make clear again, is ironclad. The security of Israel is critical. It will always make sure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself. This bill significantly increases humanitarian assistance we're sending to the innocent people of Gaza who are suffering badly. They're suffering the consequences of this war. Israel must make sure all this aid reaches the Palestinians in Gaza without delay.
Congresswoman, we've obviously got the issue of aid in this case, but also weapons support for Israel. I know you voted against that package as a standalone item in the House. Is the president wrong to green light or ask for more weapons for Israel without conditions?
The president of the United States has worked very, very hard to try and work this very difficult situation out. He just mentioned that there is a substantial ongoing support for Israel, and we know that. Those of us who voted against the supplemental package for Israel was sending a message that we did not want to give additional weapons to continue what is going on in Gaza. Over 35,000 people now have died. And I was particularly concerned about Rafah. And the president had asked Netanyahu to not bomb Rafah. The people are jammed in there. They have nowhere to go. And so I think it was significant that those of us who care about solving this whole issue, who care about the hostages that are being held by Hamas, who care about the children who are dying, we simply want to make sure that we do everything that we can to try and bring an end to the destruction that's going on. So the president is doing the absolute best job that he can possibly do.
Well, certainly, Congresswoman, there are a number of issues that you care about, not just on this issue, but given your seat as the ranking member on the House Financial Services Committee, and there could still be more work ahead of you in that committee. There's been more activity in regard to stablecoin legislation, specifically in the Senate. Senators Lummis and Gillibrand have put forward an effort. It seems Sherrod Brown might be on board if it's attached to safer banking for marijuana companies, as well as executive clawbacks for failed banks. What conversations are you having with your counterpart, Patrick McHenry, in that regard? Is there going to be an agreement here?
Well, I want you to know that Patrick McHenry and I have been working very well together. We have been working on this for 22 months. We have put together legislation with a few more tweaks that we may have to put to it that I think is going to bring everybody together. One of the things about this bill is it's been very complicated. We have so many entities that are involved. We have the feds, we have the Treasury, we have the White House. Everybody has had something to say, and we've had to recognize all of those concerns. But in doing that, in the final analysis, it's about making sure that investors and that the people are protected and that we don't have a stablecoin bill where people who are, basically the companies don't have the assets that they say that they have. We have to ensure that they have those assets to back up stablecoins. We are talking with the Senate side. We've met with Schumer. I've talked with Sherrod Brown. We're on our way to getting a stablecoin bill in the short run.
Well, Congresswoman, in the meantime, cannabis companies in California are driving around with massive sums of cash and cannot access the banking system. The Safe Banking Act has passed the House something like 30 times. I've lost track of the number. If not now, if not attached to this provision, as Kayleigh mentioned, and possibly by way of the FAA extension, if not now, when?
Now is the time. And I want you to know that those of us who have worked with Mr. Schumer, we want very much to have safer banking. And I know that there may be some concerns with McConnell, but I am hopeful that we can overcome that because you're absolutely right. We've got to have safer banking. And most of us who have been working on this support that.
Congresswoman, in your final moment with us, we know also that you'd like to mark what April is, which is the 56th anniversary of the passage of the Fair Housing Act. What work specifically do you want to see done in fair housing in the remainder of this Congress?
Well, as everyone knows, fair housing has been an issue in this country historically. We know that people have been discriminated against for so many reasons, because of the color of your skin, because you have children, because of any other reasons that landlords may come up with. And we have to protect against that. We have to have fair housing available for all of the people. This is a 56-year-old operation that we've been working on to get fair housing, to eliminate all of those discriminatory opportunities, and we will continue to work on it. I have it in one of the big bills that I'm putting forward to ensure that the law is respected and passed, and we just have to keep doing it. We're at a point in this country where we should be beyond discriminating people because of their color and because of the children and because of the way they look or any of that. We really shouldn't have to fight as hard, but we've got to make sure that people understand this is law. Fair housing is law, and we're going to do everything that we can to enforce it.
We're glad to have you back, Congresswoman. Maxine Waters, Democrat from California. Thanks for the time today on Bloomberg. Coming up, President Biden says the $95 billion foreign aid package on the way to Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan will in fact boost manufacturing here at home. We're going to take a closer look at the domestic impact on the U.S. manufacturing base next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's kind of one of those win-win situations. Not only are we helping the Ukrainians in the fight against an aggressor, we're improving our stockpiles of our own weapons, and we're improving our domestic manufacturing capacity.
That was Neil Bradley from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce discussing the supplemental spending package and the defense sector on this program. Around this time yesterday, Bloomberg Economics chief geoeconomics analyst Jennifer Welch is with us right now. Jenny, it's great to see you. This bill is actually now law, and we have been talking about this with you since the end of last year, and I think it's worth reminding everyone that it was Jenny who introduced us to the DIB, the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, and the importance that it lies here in this case, the need for investment more specifically. So here we have the money, more than $60 billion for Ukraine, more than $20 for Israel. A lot of it is staying here at home. We heard the president today refer to Georgia, Texas, Florida, other states. To what extent is this going to be spent here in the U.S.?
No, thanks so much, Joe, for having me on. Always a pleasure. We would estimate about 70% of this bill is in some way, shape, or form going to make its way back into the U.S. economy. A huge portion of it, almost 50%, is going directly into U.S. procurement and R&D. About a third of it is going in the form of security assistance to Ukraine, to Israel, and to other U.S. partners who will probably use the bulk of that money to buy more U.S. weapons. So it's a huge portion of money that is coming back into the U.S. economy and into the defense industrial base. My one caution would be it's going to take some time for that money to filter through the system. Contracting can take a long time, especially when foreign partners are involved.
Just quickly on foreign partners, we have about a minute left, Jenny, but we do have the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, in China. We know there's been a lot of tension, if you will, in that relationship, trying to smooth it over on the diplomacy front, but a lot in terms of the economy and trade that they're struggling with. What would you expect to see out of this visit?
Well, I think, to be honest, we're not expecting concrete deliverables here. He's going in with a tough message. He's going in at a tough time. But really what this is about is providing sort of a pressure valve for them to talk about those frictions and to demonstrate to the rest of the world that Washington's trying to manage them.
Okay, so talking maybe for the sake of talking. Bloomberg Economics' Jennifer Welch, thank you so much, as always, for joining us. We appreciate it. Coming up next, we're going to have more on what's coming up tomorrow, as the Supreme Court will be ready to hear the immunity from prosecution arguments that Donald Trump is bringing in his Washington case, and he'll be back in court in New York. Nick Akerman, former Watergate prosecutor, is with us next on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We're going to need to watch how they react to this and how much of this breaks through versus how much of how people think about Donald Trump's criminality is already baked in. He was never convicted by a jury of average folks in a way that it's possible he will be this year. That could be an inflection point if it comes.
Eli Oakley from Morning Consult talking with us earlier about how former President Trump's legal cases could impact voting in November. The Supreme Court now set to consider whether Donald Trump is entitled to immunity from federal prosecution. This is related to the case looking into his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. And we're joined now by former Watergate prosecutor Nick Akerman on the eve of these arguments. Mr. Akerman, it's great to see you. Welcome back. This is what will let us know. This is what will allow for or not allow for Jack Smith's January 6th trial to go forward here in Washington, D.C. To what extent will the arguments tomorrow, and more specifically, the remarks that we hear from the justices themselves, give us a sense of how they may rule?
Oh, I think we're going to get a good idea tomorrow based on questions and what they say during that argument, where this is all going. I must say, I really don't see why the Supreme Court even bothered to take this case in the first instance. The D.C. Circuit handled it well, a 3-0 opinion. It doesn't seem to me that anyone can argue with a straight face that what Donald Trump was doing were official acts that, in effect, had to do with interfering in the election and trying to stop the peaceful transfer of power. The argument that Donald Trump seems to be making is something that could have been made back in Watergate days for Richard Nixon. Certainly, his calls, directing calls from the CIA to the FBI to stop the investigation into the Watergate burglary was undoubtedly an official act, but it was criminal. It was designed to obstruct justice. And the same way here that this was criminal. So I don't quite understand what the Supreme Court is going to do with this. It just, to me, just at its gut level, doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Well, Nick, I guess there's the question of why they took it up in the first place. There's also the question of how long they will take to ultimately rule. Technically, they won't need to do so until the end of June when the term's up. And by that point, if the judge in this case, Judge Tanya Chutkan, is saying you need 3 months to prepare for a trial, we're talking maybe late September, assuming no more delays. How consequential is the court's timing on the timing question of whether ultimately Trump will sit in another trial before the election?
The timing here is absolutely everything. It is absolutely critical in order to get this case back on track. The question is, how quickly will the Supreme Court come down with an opinion? They came down pretty quickly after they decided on the 14th Amendment issue. In fact, they actually argued that and pushed it forward a lot quicker. I think they can do it in a matter of weeks, a week or two, to get an opinion out on this. It's not very difficult. There's not much to it, but you're absolutely right. You hit the nail on the head. This is all about timing. If he makes it through this and this doesn't get tried before the election, there's always the danger that somehow if he gets reelected, he could just pardon himself or appoint an attorney general who would dismiss the charges that are currently present.
All the while, his criminal trial is underway in New York. Nick, it's one that you have taken more seriously than some other legal minds on this broadcast. And we're going to start hearing some real testimony at this point, not just David Pecker, which has been quite compelling with his whole catch and kill scheme that they were running at the Inquirer, but we're going to hear from Stormy Daniels. We're going to hear from Michael Cohen. What are you listening for in the days ahead that will matter 6 weeks from now in the outcome of this case?
I think we started to hear it from David Pecker, and we're going to get it more tomorrow when he resumes testimony. Essentially, what he's doing is he's laying out the format here. He's setting out kind of the contours of the scheme that was set up in order to help Donald Trump in the 2016 election, including catching and killing any kind of story that threatened to undermine his election prospects in 2016. What we're going to hear from David Pecker is kind of the full outline of that story. He was present with Michael Cohen and Donald Trump when they hatched that scheme in June of 2016. He was present throughout the entire period, including the involvement with the doorman, with Karen McDougal, with Stormy Daniels. And if you look at the website now, the New York State Court has a website set up, and you can actually look at the exhibits that have gone through so far with Mr. Pecker. And you can read yesterday's testimony today. That's now on the website. And it gives you a pretty clear picture of what's going on. And by the time it's Michael Cohen's turn to testify, the jury is going to be totally acclimated to what happened, and his credibility is almost going to be sealed by the fact of what David Pecker says over the next day or so.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Nick, obviously there is much to keep an eye on in the courts in regard to former President Trump, but there are a number of other issues as well. The Supreme Court today was hearing not about the former president's immunity from prosecution question, but around a question related to abortion access in Idaho, specifically in emergency cases. We have seen this issue coming up time and again, that ultimately this court, which of course issued the Dobbs ruling that overturned Roe v. Wade, is having to come back and revisit different abortion questions, as are Supreme Courts across states, including Arizona, which essentially is having its House and Senate undo what the state Supreme Court there has done. Can you just speak to the complications around the legality of abortion in America in a post-Dobbs world?
Well, what happened is when they overruled Roe versus Wade, they created a whole series of problems that are really exemplified by what happened today in the Supreme Court with this Idaho statute that basically requires a woman to be on her deathbed before she has an abortion. The federal law requires that emergency care be given to a woman who comes into a hospital. But under Idaho law, unless you're on the verge of death, you're not entitled to an abortion. And so this is not a good situation in Idaho because already, as it came out today in the argument, 6 women have had to be flown from Idaho to other states to have abortions to save their lives. So in effect, what this Idaho law is requiring is that people remain in Idaho, be as sick as possible until they're nearly dead, and then they're required to an abortion, which is ridiculous. And in Arizona, we had a similar situation today where finally the Arizona House decided to overrule that old 1865 law on abortion, which is now going to the Senate, which is also controlled by the Republicans there. So we don't know how that's going to come out yet. But the bottom line is this has created a lot of turmoil. It's not going to stop, and it's just going to snowball into a major issue for the 2024 election.
All right, Nick Akerman, former Watergate prosecutor, we always appreciate your insight. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up, House Speaker Mike Johnson speaks at Columbia University with growing tensions around pro-Palestinian protests on that campus and others across the country. We'll have more with our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
They have proven themselves to be incapable of achieving their basic responsibility, which is keeping students safe. We just can't allow this kind of hatred and anti-Semitism to flourish on our campuses, and it must be stopped in its tracks. Those who are perpetrating this violence should be arrested. And I'm here today joining my colleagues and calling on President Shafiq to resign.
That's House Speaker Mike Johnson at Columbia University earlier today, calling on the institution's president to resign after the protests on campus. For more, we're joined now by our political panel. Emily Lampkin is the founder of the Women's Leaders Series, and Kristen Hahn is a partner at Rock Solutions. Great to have both of you with us. Kristen, it was brought up by the deputy leader of our congressional coverage earlier today that this was an opportunity for Johnson and the Republican House colleagues that were there behind him from the New York delegation to really highlight division within the Democratic Party after so much attention has been paid to division in Republicans in regard to Ukraine aid and a number of other things. Does he have a point in that? Is this an opportunity for Republicans to instead focus the spotlight back on Democrats and many young progressives who are unhappy with President Biden and administration policy over Israel?
I mean, I think that he could. I mean, it's a weakness. I mean, it's a point of contention, definitely within the Democratic Party. We've managed to stay very united around a lot of these different issues, but it's a hot button issue on these college campuses. I'm assuming that's exactly what he's trying to do right now. It's, and a lot of younger Americans are paying attention to this. So, it's something we have to keep an eye on. However, voters are really paying attention to a lot of other issues, including, women's health care, the abortion issue, and, your kitchen table issues, too.
Interesting to see who has shown up on Columbia's campus here today. It was the Speaker of the House. We've seen Democrats and Republicans, lawmakers. We talked to Kathy Manning here yesterday about her visit a couple of days earlier. The Speaker's different, though. This is the highest ranking elected official we've seen. What's he doing at Columbia?
I was going to say, I really hope it's less a political issue and more an American issue. That we need to make sure that kids not, quote, feel safe, but kids are safe. And that's the fundamental job of these schools. They get huge tax breaks and they get our taxpayer money. And their first job is to make sure everybody's safe on their campus. The second is to educate them. Columbia's failed in both. They've now had 2 deadlines. I don't know who the leadership is, but it seems more like anarchy, and that's got to stop. I would assume our government officials need to be addressing it. I hear President Biden is in New York tomorrow. I hope he has the common sense as well to go check out one of these situations himself.
Well, it is this difficult question for these universities, though, Emily, in that these students do have a right to free speech and expression. You heard the speaker say it himself when they were chanting, "We can't hear you." He said, "Enjoy your First Amendment rights," or something to that effect. So how does that need to be balanced here?
I don't think it's difficult at all. I am the biggest staunch proponent of freedom of speech. They have a First Amendment right. But these are schools, and they have rules. You can't be in people's ways. You can't threaten somebody's existence. You can't side with terrorists and say that we're going to wipe people off the face of the earth. There is a clear line between free speech and supporting terrorism and not following the rules of your university.
There's a line between free speech and intimidation, which is what we're hearing about on these campuses. And, Kristen, there's a great worry about graduation season coming up here. We heard about that from Representative Manning yesterday, that they're putting up the risers right now. The bleachers are being erected. The graduation ceremony at Columbia will be May 15th. Should Joe Biden make a statement about this, go to Columbia and get involved in this conversation in a more direct way?
I don't know if the president himself should go to Columbia. I mean, that can escalate things in a number of different ways. I mean, he has acknowledged that this is an issue. He's going to need to continue to acknowledge this is an issue. It can be a difficult issue, but, you know, at the end of the day, if you're looking at it purely from a political perspective, there's a large swath of young voters out there who are very upset right now. But as Emily said, you know, they have to maintain, you know, safety on these campuses, which, by the way, same thing goes for the Democratic and Republican conventions, which we should be watching.
Yeah, that's true. Well, he could join them, though, in calling for their federal funding to be pulled.
He could.
Is that a bridge too far for Joe Biden?
I mean, I think that there are a lot. I mean, that's up to the president to say. It might be, you know, a bridge too far to say all federal funding should be pulled from, you know, academic institutions. Where does that stop? Yeah. But, you know, up to the White House.
Yeah. Well, certainly we heard President Biden earlier today, not addressing this particular issue, but addressing the supplemental package that he signed today, and specifically what was not in it, border security provisions. Take a listen to the president earlier today.
There's one thing this bill does not do, border security. You know, just this year I proposed and negotiated and agreed to the strongest border security bill this country has ever seen. It was bipartisan. It should have been included in this bill, and I'm determined to get it done for the American people. But I'll come back to that at another moment, another time.
Emily, of course, that deal he was referring to, Donald Trump didn't like very much, and that may have played a role in the fact that it never made it through either chamber of Congress. Have we lost the chance on the border for the remainder?
It was clever of him to say that, right? Like, he's a proponent of keeping our borders safe and not letting illegal people in our country. Like, he hasn't been in office for a very long time, doing nothing about it.
But he has agreed to this deal.
Okay. Last minute, pushed into a corner, shoved tight, and then says, oh, I'm in favor of this. He's got a lot of work to do before he's calling out Republicans on this border issue.
Would the border be worse off if they had passed it?
I don't know. I don't know if the border would be worse off. I can't imagine that things there can necessarily change that quickly until the White House decides they're going to take this seriously and work within the government to make sure we secure it.
It's something we're going to keep talking about, hopefully with Emily and Kristen. They're going to stay with us. Coming up next, there's a lot more on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I think overall there's been lots of evidence that people are starting to appreciate more of the positive things in this economy. When people have gone to the polls, when they've actually voted and had a chance to register their unhappiness, like in 2022, what happened? It ended up being a historically positive election for this president.
That's Gene Sperling, senior advisor to the president, reacting to our latest Bloomberg News Morning Consult swing state poll showing voters in those 7 states are still unhappy with the president's handling of the economy, and in some cases it's getting worse. We're back with our panel now. Emily Lampkin, Women's Leaders Series founder, and Kristen Hahn, Rock Solutions partner. Great to have you both with us here. Kristen, we have a problem on the economy specifically among undecideds. It's not just how people are feeling now. It's the idea that we have nothing good to look forward to. Joe Biden talks about optimism every time he walks by a microphone. But among undecided voters, single digits believe the economy is going to improve in the next year. What do you do with that if you want to be reelected?
I mean, it's a difficult spot to be in, right? We've had high inflation for a while, and if you even have a drop in inflation like we did for a little bit there, people don't necessarily see the positive in that. And then also, you know, when people are getting promoted or getting raises at work, we know that they feel because, you know, something that they did. But when, you know, things go poorly, we blame it on the economy, which means we blame it on the president. So, you know, it's a hurdle. I think that he's doing a good job by going to those swing states and talking to people and physically showing them what, you know, he's been doing. It's not insurmountable, but at the end of the day, you know, it's the economy. It's like when people come to the kitchen table and are they hurting? And it takes a while to change that public mentality.
So he was really leaning into Bidenomics initially. It seems now he's trying to lean in on other issues that may be more in his favor, whether that is the safety of American democracy or specifically abortion, which also showed up in our poll. It certainly grew in importance in Arizona, where the state Supreme Court had essentially allowed a Civil War era ban to go into place. Today, though, the Arizona State House is moving to repeal that. It needs the sign off from the Senate, but there's a chance all of that gets unwound. Does that take an issue away from the incumbent president?
No, you don't take that issue off the table for the incumbent president. I mean, this is something that people are concerned with, and the former President Trump he's falling all over himself trying to figure out how to answer the question. He's saying, you know, the states need to be, he's taken, you know, credit for Roe. He is saying it needs to be up to the states. Then this is what happens, and this is why President Biden, it's not necessarily the Democrats are going to win Florida, but he's going to Florida to say this is what happens when the states have control over this, when you give the decision-making to the states. So this doesn't end with Arizona. You know, this is an ongoing problem that Trump is going to have to deal with.
How does he talk about this? This is such a sensitive issue. He made clear that this Arizona problem would be fixed, as he said, and it does appear to be turning around here. How does he handle this when reporters ask him about it?
Are you talking about President Trump?
Yeah.
Well, he's in court and doesn't get to spend much time on the road, so he doesn't get to answer as many reporter questions that he would. He does answer more, even in court, than Joe Biden does, who's not in court and is the president of the United States. So there is a difference there. I think they're smart about answering this. Also, to this same issue, I think Arizona, like many states, this should be a state issue, and they're resolving it. And it's not going to necessarily be linear and overnight, but I think so much of this will be resolved this fall. And this is an important issue to some voters. They should vote on it. Many more voters are concerned about the economy, and will vote on that.
Well, Emily, you mentioned that Trump's been spending a lot of time in court. He will be doing so again in New York tomorrow, not attending the hearings at the Supreme Court and his immunity from prosecution question for the case here in Washington. But to your point, while he has been out there saying, I'm not on the campaign trail because I have to be here, he's still talking to the cameras on the way in and on the way out every day. Is that enough for him?
I think it's the reality.
Is it just as effective?
I don't know, but I've been actually pleasantly surprised how effective it's been. And I think he's also been effective finding a stop every once in a while on the way in or out of court to connect with people again. I think he's done a fantastic job then campaigning on the weekends as well.
Until now, the strategy for Joe Biden has been let him go, don't talk about it. Will that be the case straight through the next 6 weeks here when the witness testimony starts to get spicy?
I mean, I think you've seen, you know, more of the spiciness coming out of the campaign and responding to some of the things that Trump is saying. I think the president of the United States is the president of the United States, and he still is, you know, having to deal with everything that goes along with that. So I don't think that you'll see a lot more than he's doing coming out of his own, you know, delivery, his own mouth, and that he'll leave that to the campaign.
Well, there also is the question when Trump is repeatedly saying that this is Biden that is running essentially all these different cases against me. Perhaps there is the desire to avoid the optics of impropriety or being influencing these
Either way, the
cases
split screen continues, and we'll be following both here, of course, on Balance of Power. Many thanks to Emily Lampkin and Kristen Hahn. A great conversation and a great panel with us today on Balance of Power.
And, of course, for more coverage of Trump's legal cases, the passage of foreign aid, abortion, and all of the other issues we deal with here in Washington each and every day. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter. You can find that on the terminal and online.
It's on to the Supreme Court tomorrow. When we're back here, we'll be talking about those immunity arguments that we got into with Nick Akerman. Tomorrow's going to be pivotal, and we'll have a lot more for you here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.